Hello, everyone. How are you? It's nice to see a few familiar faces. It's also interesting to be in a room with people whose work you've read, actually, and to recognise those names. So it's a real privilege. So thank you. So I'm going to say a bit. I was asked to say a bit about the state of the NHS workforce as well as the work that I've been doing with Tavistock, and I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of our two hospitals in East London. We've got about 8,500 staff there, and what I say is going to be drawn from our staff survey. We've just had our biggest ever staff survey response. 56% of the staff, up from 41% last year, have contributed, including the consultants, more than half the consultants, which is great to get, actually. And we also run, I think, not common amongst acute trusts. We've got an in-house occupational health clinical psychology team. And we run two programs of work through that. One, which is for referrals through people's managers, where they have a series of it's an open-ended series of appointments with a clinical psychologist. And we've had 500 of our staff go through that now. In the last 2 years, on average, they have 11 sessions, but it can go up to 24, 25 sessions if people need it. And we've also got a service called Listen Here, which is a self-referral to the same team of occupational health psychologists as well, clinical psychologists. We've had about 600, 700 staff through that now as well. And we tend to see slightly different presentations coming through the self-referral and the management referral routes. But so what I'm going to give you is a combination of feedback from those sources, plus my own strongly held anecdotal opinions, which are often wrong as well. But that's part of the job, isn't it? So it's a combination of all those things, really. So our staff, of the 8,500, 70% of them are women. 40% are white. The NHS average is 77%, but in BHRET, 40% are white. Actually, 35% of our staff are Asian and 17% are black. So it's a really interesting dynamic. It's very representative of the part of East London we work in. And actually, so some of what we see is slightly atypical as well, but it does make it a really exciting place to be. As with the NHS on the whole, there is a white middle-aged man in charge. But that's not what the staff look like, and that's not what the leadership teams are increasingly look like as we bring people through and develop them within the organisation. Interesting. I thought this was interesting to see. 65% of our staff have never worked from home, and another 10% rarely, if ever, work from home. So 3/4 of our staff are not in a kind of back to the office phase because you can't clean a patient from home. You can't do a scan from home. So we're not necessarily typical of some of the organisations that we talk about culture these days. And I think there's something about the kind of permanence of NHS institutions that's really interesting. And that extent to which people love to hate us or love to love us is part of that, is about that permanence, that solidity we've got in the community. And we're a big employer locally. We've got more than 400 apprentices now. We're a registered apprenticeship provider with Ofsted, actually. And we recognise the fact that lots of the women who work for us are actually the main breadwinners in their family, and particularly in the nursing profession. And that creates an interesting series of dynamics, and it creates a responsibility for us as an employer in our part of London. I mean, we do things now like we run a free school uniform session in the summer, so the staff can come in and help themselves to school uniform in the colours of all the local schools. We do free period products for women. And what we've tried to do is a series of things to put money into the pockets of women who are having to run their families at home. We can't affect their salaries, but we can do things around that. So, but this is largely because we recognise that what people are dealing with is a really, really tough work context at the minute. There are lots of positives, and I could sit here and talk about the state of the NHS and make it relentlessly bad. It's actually, I love the job. And I love working there. And any time I become downhearted, it's probably because I've been on Teams all day talking about money. And if I need to cheer myself up, I will go and walk around the hospital, and I will go, if I want to feel really happy, I'll go into the labour ward and then see the new babies and things like that. I'll go and see care of the elderly wards. I'll go into A&E where the numbers look scary, but usually actually it's pretty calm and pretty well managed. And these are the things that uplift you. And in our staff survey this year, morale's up, engagement's up. Every single statistically significant improvement is around learning and development, compassionate leadership, having a voice in the organisation. So there's lots going well, but that's not that interesting, I think. So I'll tell you a bit about the stuff that's not going quite so well, and a bit about how some of the insights that we've been working on have helped with that. So burnout is the biggest thing. 45% of our staff said that the stress of their job has made them sick in the last year. And 2/3 of the staff have said that in the last 3 months before they completed the survey, they felt too unwell to do their job but still came into work, which is quite interesting if you think of going in for an operation and the team of 20 or so people who are caring for you, and you think about the context and what that means for that. 1/3 of them in the last year have experienced violence and aggression from patients and staff. And actually, the rates of experiencing that are fairly similar between white and non-white staff. We're actually a much bigger outlier for the violence and aggression our white staff face, but that's unfortunately because non-white staff just experience more violence and aggression for the public anyway. And a quarter of them have experienced abuse and harassment from colleagues as well, again, fairly evenly spread across the white and non-white staffing groups as well. So we have a working environment where a good chunk of the staff are quite tired or feel like they're being made unwell by the work they're doing. And they're also routinely in the habit of experiencing violence and aggression. We spend £1.5 million a year on security in Romford. So we spend more money on security in the hospital than all the nightclubs and bars in Romford town centre do. We've got 11 open police investigations within the trust as well, about half of which are to do with domestic violence relating to staff as well. And some of the staff both work in the hospital as well, which creates some interesting dynamics as well. So it is quite a potent mix of different cultural and social and economic things going on in the organisation. It's part of the reason I absolutely love working there. But when you hear what comes through the clinical psychologists, it's work stresses first, irrespective of the referral route. Then, though, typically the occupational health referrals through managers, it's to do with family problems in the home that are influencing people's behaviours, and their colleagues have noticed them and said you need to get help. The self-referrals, it's more about anxiety and depression experienced by that person where they don't want their team to know about it, but they want help with it as well. So we are dealing with a workforce that I'm not sure what other sectors look like if you benchmark this against other sectors. I hope the aerospace industry is better, but we are a safety industry and we do have a significant amount of pressure being borne by the people that are looking after us. So how does that sort of translate into some of the stuff we've got to do? One thing I want to mention is the pandemic. That comes up in the top 10 reasons for contacting our occupational health clinical psychologists even now. It is not far below the surface. I have interesting conversations sometimes with people where halfway through a one-to-one with them, I will think, do I want to make this person cry before the end of this conversation? And I can decide by the questions that I ask them because of what they're talking to me about whether they'll end up in tears or not. And you can see it's there. And you decide which way you want to take it, depending on what the issue is that you're trying to resolve there. And the staff experience of the amount of death we saw in North East London, it was the highest in the country, is significant. Our wards are about 30 beds. An average care of the elderly ward will get a couple of deaths a month, but not the sort of numbers that they saw during the pandemic. What we pulled in during the pandemic was that all the wards, all the services, everyone in work saw people dying in significant numbers all the time. And we heard about in the introduction about the PTSD experienced by people returning from the war. We have, I think, quite a lot of undiagnosed, untreated PTSD amongst the workforce. I think our emergency department clinicians are probably bearing the brunt of that now in terms of what they have to deal with day in, day out. But I think it stretches right through the hospitals. It's not just the clinicians as well. I was relatively unscathed through the pandemic, to be honest. I was out running the other week and I was listening to a book and it was set during the pandemic and it was talking about lockdown, and it talked about one of the characters in the novel becoming very unwell and being taken into ICU, and I'd stopped running because I started crying. And if you'd asked me a few weeks ago, how do you feel about the pandemic? I said, I'm fine, I'm through all that, it's long gone. And I was there with my hands on my knees, puffing and blowing with tears pouring down my face. And I thought, that's weird. I'll have to mention that to Charlotte next time I talk to her. But, and I think for a lot of the folk in the organisation, that stuff is sitting there just under the surface. And I also think it's sitting just under the surface of the people that come into the hospital. And something has changed in the public's attitude to healthcare now. And when they come through the front door, we recognise there's an expectation of things being difficult, and there's a degree of aggression in the simple inquiries that we didn't see before. We've redesigned the front of the hospital actually to put in a reception desk and to make it feel a bit more like a kind of hotel actually, rather than a clinical environment, to try to moderate people's behaviours. We've got the security standing around the corner, not right at the front now as well, but they're not far away. But there is just a general level of aggression. I think we spent 2 years telling people that strangers will kill you. I think we spent a couple of years losing all those small social skills you get from constant interaction with people you don't know and being in public spaces. And I think we're also now in an environment where you can go into a packed coffee shop and everyone is there, but they're not communicating with any of the people around them, all their communication is happening digitally with people who are not present with them. And I think it's fundamentally changed some of the way that people relate to one another. And I think we see that in our services, in the challenges that people have to engage with the people who are delivering care to them, and in the aggression that they bring with them. Not just the what's going to happen to me here, what have I seen in the news, but also I don't like talking to humans much anymore. And I think that translates into a kind of sense of frustration within the organisation that makes our job harder and that we've got to think about. And I think some of it also is the interest and expectations of employees as well. I was talking to a friend who trains teachers at the minute, and I think we've done a good job at not treating people as mugs anymore by expecting them to work 70 hours on a 35-hour week. I think we've not quite hit the Goldilocks zone, and that we might have gone slightly too far in the other direction of what do you expect if you work in an emergency department. What can we do to control the environment in which someone's works and to moderate those stressors? And I think sometimes we find ourselves in the role of the bad people who are trying to do, this is all very Tavistocky, isn't it? But we become the people that are frustrating the desire of the clinicians to do good because we're making their environment so difficult for them to work in. And there's a lot happening at the minute that's influenced all that as well. And I think hospitals are really weird places to work. You don't realise it when you work in them, but you're like cheerfully telling someone about what's happened during your week, and you see their face going, my chief people officer came in from Sky TV, and she says now when she talks to them about the number of grievance cases we've got and the nature of them, she can't believe what we put, she can't believe what she used to think was bad compared to what we're now dealing with. And yet we don't really, I think, talk enough about that. There's not many environments where you ask a 23-year-old to go and talk to two very angry 65-year-olds whose 90-year-old parent is dying and help them navigate their way through that process of grief and death. And we train all these quite young kids actually in some really, really difficult stuff, but don't necessarily give them the psychological support to deal with it. And it affects us as well. I mean, I was down in Devon last year where my wife's dad was in the last few months of his life. And I went to see him in Torbay Hospital, and the consultant came in and spoke to him, to my wife and to my mother-in-law. And by the end of that, I thought, all right, I'm going to have to be ready to be in consolation mode now. That was really quite difficult. And they both started talking about, what can we do to get him home for Easter? I was thinking, how have we sat there and listened to exactly the same feedback from a clinician? And because I work in a hospital, I knew what he was saying. And when he was saying, we'll do this to make him comfortable, and then we'll try a bit of that, they were hearing, yeah, we're going to crack on and we're going to get him fixed. What I heard was, spend as much time with him in the next few days as you possibly can. And it really struck me that actually we don't think enough about how the dynamic of being around so much death and illness influences our own engagement with it. A few weeks after he died, my CMO had to gently put her hand on my leg in a meeting with a family whose father had died as well. He'd had chronic COPD, he'd had 3 or 4 heart attacks since he was in his 50s, and when he was in his 80s, he was a profoundly unwell man. The NHS had kept him alive for decades, and they were furious about the fact that he'd finally died and that we hadn't been able to kind of fix him. And I lost my temper with them. My own grief was, I think, too raw. Actually, I shouldn't have gone into the conversation with hindsight. Actually, my chief nurse had excused herself because her dad had just died, but I thought, I'm all right, keep making these mistakes. And I walked in, and when they were talking to me, I just felt myself back in that place there, and I felt my anger coming through, and I thought, God, I'm quite well insulated from this stuff. Thousands of our staff are not insulated from this stuff. And this is where the unconscious life and the unconscious behaviours of the people around us becomes so important. There's a lot more I could say about the kind of chronic niceness of our staff, their desire to hold on to people, to care for people long beyond the point where it's actually in the interest of some of the patients to remain with us. We've got a looked after child in our hospital at the minute who's been in the emergency department for around 700 hours now. So since early February, because the corporate parent in the local authority, which is outside London, can't find a placement for them. And our staff have washed that child's clothes. They've provided things for them, and they recognise that we could discharge that child, but we're profoundly angry at the concept that we might without something in place for them. And you see all these elements of the personal relationships coming through in the way that people care for people, and it's such it's a tremendous environment to be in anyway. And I'll move on though now as to why really I contacted the Tavistock, and part of it was I got The Unconscious at work. I've checked on Amazon. I bought 6 copies now. 2 of them are mine. One of them because I lost a copy and then found it later when I'd ordered another one. The other 4 because I bought them for other people. But as I was reading through it, I was thinking, right. So when I had that really difficult set of relationships with the emergency doctors in one of my previous jobs, that was why they largely withdrew and sent the most aggressive an angry Northern Irish consultant to come in and shout at me every time we tried to do anything to their department, you know? And I read through chapter after chapter thinking this explains why that happened to me. And so I came to Tavistock because I was exploring actually the route to becoming an executive coach myself, which is something I've decided I want to do. But in the process of exploring access to that, I realised I probably needed to do a bit more work on myself. So that's the phase I'm in at the minute, actually, with Charlotte, actually, who coaches me. None of this is her responsibility, by the way, if what I'm saying. And so I think this is entirely down to me. She's got a lot of work to do. But I've been working with her to try to understand more about me and how I run the organisation. And my job is to set the direction for the place. It's to build the team that can run the organisation and let them get on with it. I think one of my favourite management quotes was from Killing Eve, which was about an assassin. Don't know if anyone watched that. And she went back to see the woman who trained her to be an assassin, who said, management is watching someone else do a job worse than you could do it yourself. And that's profoundly not how you should manage, actually. And I've always striven to build a team who are much better at their functional roles than I would be. Otherwise, I'd get in their way, really. To lead with optimism, I don't think we talk enough about the role of optimism in leadership and the importance of it when you're trying to take people, particularly through difficult times like this, with a degree of authenticity. And also to set the tone and the values and the way in which we want to do it. And really, the Tavistock for me is about unlocking that how and why people work, and being able to translate the job of the leader into something that allows you to take the organisation forward in a way that recognises why things are happening and why people are behaving in the way that they are, and turn it into something that delivers. And I think operationally we are in that place now where we have got far greater engagement. We can show performance-wise how we're delivering. But I mean, for me, lots of this came though from that sense of curiosity about why we do what we do. And I do think the NHS at leadership level needs to encourage more curiosity about the why things happen in organisations. I'm delighted Louise is here. Louise was a neighbouring chief exec with me, and I know Michael as well from when he was at SLAM and I was at Oxley's as well. And there are some really great leaders within the NHS, but sometimes institutionally it does not spend enough time thinking about why it acts in the way it does. And the number of times I've sat there and people have presented us with plans about things that will fix parts of the system and it has never worked. It's because the presenting problem is never being driven by the things that we're driving it. And there's that lack of curiosity and lack of tools to really get to grips with the people and the factors that are driving this. Some of my own personal interest was I've got cyclothymia, which is a mild form of bipolar, and I've done 2 prolonged periods of CBT, without which I don't think I'd be working these days, to be quite honest. And I'd always said to people, I think everyone in leadership jobs should do CBT. They don't need to do CBT, but they do need coaching that helps them understand how people work, why they work, and how the organisations around them work. I'm intellectually arrogant as well, so I spent years telling other people to get coaches, and then every time I spoke to a coach, they'd tell me what they were going to do. I'd Google a bit of it and think, oh no, that's going to go, I can't be bothered. So I'd politely say to them, thank you very much, but I don't think this is for me. But actually what I found in my sessions with Charlotte is, sometimes we do sort of ramble to each other for quite a long period of time, but there's always a point in the session where from my ramblings, she will draw an insight I didn't have about myself. And what I find is that I will then, shortly after that, find myself deploying that insight in the decision I'm making. And I think for me, that is the essence of really good quality support for leadership in NHS organisations, or indeed in any organisations. And that's why I was delighted to be asked to come here today, really. I'm intrigued by the fact that in the NHS, we have an operating plan about the numbers that will deliver in performance terms. We have a financial plan, and we have a workforce plan that's just about the numbers of people, but nothing about how those people feel and how those people engage with the organisation and how those people find satisfaction and joy in the work that they do. I think that's my job to bring that to the trust, actually, and working with the Tavistock is enabling me to do that. We talked about the emotional life of NHS trusts and of groups within them. This, for me, is the key to that. This is the key for how we get through the next couple of really difficult years for the service in a financial context. And this is the key for how we make our services better. My job really is not running a hospital or balancing a budget, although it feels like that at the minute. My job is about leading a team that can run a hospital and understanding how that team interacts with all the groups that deliver the services we run and how we find out what's making them behave in the way that they are. and particularly under the pressures that other people have cited at the minute, how do we avoid it becoming evil executives versus values-based clinicians trying to do a wonderful job if it wasn't for awful people like me telling them they can't have any more money? And that is such a big risk at the minute, actually, in the context, because there's all that you always hear that we need to become more productive and deliver more for less. That's not what the next 2 years is about. The next 2 years is about deciding what we stop doing for a period of time to try to get the budget back. This is like local authorities shutting libraries and swimming pools for the NHS, the budget for the next couple of years. And that is going to require a degree of authenticity in leadership and a degree of an ability to communicate with our staff that connects to what really matters to them and influences their behaviour. So for me, this is a really timely and important time to have this conversation. I think speaking as a chief exec, there's something about us realising we are not on the pitch, we are coaches. And our job as leaders is as much about coaching as it is about setting direction. And it's about giving the people around us the tools and the skills to do the job to their best of the ability. And I think it's also really important to think that the NHS is just magnificent, really. It's a wonderful, sort of tarnished institution. It's kind of battered around the edges, but at its core, it's still a fantastic thing. And the fact that we can offer care irrespective of your economic circumstances, that many of our staff do a wonderful job of offering compassion without judgment about the thing that brought you there. And the fact that we have just these fantastic, incredibly innovative and specialised clinicians working. I mean, just within 20 miles of this site itself, you'll find some of the very best care of its kind anywhere in the world in so many different specialties. It's a tremendous thing that we need to hold on to. But we do need to think differently about how we support it and keep this precious thing alive for the next couple of decades. So, the key to the hospitals are not the buildings, it's the people in them. And for me, actually, part of the approach that we've been working on with Tavistock is that's the key to the people. And so that, for me, is how we're going to get through the next few years together. So thanks for listening. It's been, it's been great to be invited to this. I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you, John and Charlotte, for asking me. Thank you.